The autumn thunderstorm rattled the windows of Oak Creek Veterinary Care, a counterpoint to the quiet hum of the clinic's refrigerators. In the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, a storm like this felt personal, the thunder cracking like a whip across the flat landscape. It was a sound that usually comforted Dr. Aris Thorne, a signal to curl up with a book. But tonight, it felt like a warning drum. The city glowed a hazy orange on the horizon, but here, the darkness was thick, broken only by strobing flashes of lightning. Aris, a 34-year-old vet whose compassionate brown eyes had seen too much loss, turned the lock on the front door. A quiet resilience clung to her like the simple cardigan she wore over her scrubs. Her brunette hair, pulled into a ponytail hours ago, was now a frizzy halo from the humidity and a 14-hour day. This clinic was her sanctuary, a place where she could mend what was broken, a stark contrast to the hollow ache in her own chest that had lingered since her husband, David, an Army pilot, didn't come home from his last tour 3 years ago. The alley behind the clinic was a canyon of wet brick and shadow, lit by the erratic buzz of a single security light. Pulling her collar tight against the wind-driven rain, Aris headed for her car, her boots splashing through puddles. A sound stopped her cold. It wasn't a stray cat or a raccoon. It was a low, guttural moan of an animal in agony, followed by the sharp, pained intake of a human breath. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She squinted into the darkness near the overflowing dumpster. Every instinct screamed at her to get in her car, lock the doors, and drive away. But the healer in her, the part that could not ignore suffering, forced her feet forward. Sprawled on the wet asphalt, half hidden by a stack of discarded pallets, was a massive German shepherd. Even in the gloom, she could see he was a magnificent animal, but his flank was matted with dark blood, and his breathing was shallow. Next to him lay a man. Aris rushed forward, dropping to her knees in the cold grime. He was unconscious, dressed in black tactical gear that seemed to drink the shadows. He was Jack Callahan, a 36-year-old Navy SEAL, though she didn't know it. All she saw was a man with a strong, stubbled jaw and a body honed by years of brutal training, now broken and pale. A dark stain was spreading rapidly across his left shoulder, mixing with the rain. She reached for his neck to check for a pulse. It was there, but faint and erratic. Suddenly, the dog growled, a low rumble from deep in its chest. The shepherd, whose name was Thor, was trained to be a lethal protector. Even in his own agony, his primary instinct was to guard his handler. Aris softened her posture, speaking in the low, calm tone she used on frightened patients. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, her hands up in a gesture of surrender. "I'm here to help him. I'm going to help you both." The man stirred. Cal's eyes fluttered open, dark and disoriented. He grabbed her wrist with a strength that made her gasp, his training fighting through the shock. "Thor," he rasped, his voice like gravel. "Check Thor first." Aris looked from the man to the dog, seeing the profound bond. "I will," she promised, her other hand fumbling for the phone in her pocket. "I need to call an ambulance. You're losing too much blood." As her phone's screen illuminated the alley, Cal's grip tightened, his eyes sharpening with a frightening intensity. "No," he hissed, trying to lift his head. "No cops. No hospitals. National security." The words hung in the humid air, heavy and dangerous. Aris froze. She looked at Cal, truly looked at him, and saw the same haunted, determined look she'd seen in her husband's eyes. The look of a man carrying burdens that couldn't be filed in an official report. "You could die if I don't call," she argued, though her thumb hovered over the emergency dial button, unmoving. "They'll find us," Cal gasped, his energy fading fast. "Please." He slumped back against the brick wall, his hand sliding from her wrist to rest on his dog's head. The desperation in his voice wasn't for his own life, but for the mission, and for the dog. Her husband had once told her, "If a guy comes to you off book, Aris, it means the system failed him, not the other way around." She made her choice. Shoving the phone back in her pocket, she ran to the clinic's service door, punching in the code with trembling fingers and pulling out the heavy-duty transport gurney she used for large breeds. "All right, soldier," she muttered to herself, rain plastering her hair to her face. "You are not dying on me." She wheeled the gurney beside Cal. "I need your help," she said urgently. "I can't lift you alone." Cal gritted his teeth, summoning a reserve of strength. With a groan swallowed by a clap of thunder, he used his good arm to brace himself. Aris hooked her arms under his, straining as she helped him onto the gurney. Thor, whining softly, tried to limp alongside them. Just as she started pushing the gurney toward the open door, the sound of a heavy engine cut through the storm's noise. High-intensity headlights swept the alley's entrance. A black, unmarked SUV was cruising slowly down the street. It moved with a predatory silence. Go. Cal breathed, his head lolling to the side. Inside. Aris didn't look back. She shoved the gurney with all her might. She whistled for Thor, who hauled himself inside just as the SUV's lights swung toward the back of the building. Aris slammed the heavy steel door and threw the deadbolt, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She slumped against it, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm in her ears. Outside, the SUV paused, its engine idling for 10 terrifying seconds before it accelerated and vanished into the Ohio night. She was safe, for now, but as she looked at the bleeding man and his wounded dog on the floor of her clinic, she knew her quiet life had just been shattered. The clinic's fluorescent lights hummed, illuminating a scene that looked more like a combat aid station than a suburban vet's office. The air, usually smelling of antiseptic and calming lavender, was now thick with the metallic tang of blood and the damp, earthy scent of the storm. Aris moved with adrenaline-fueled purpose. She had managed to get Cal onto the stainless steel examination table, while Thor lay on a soft mat on the floor. The dog panted, his amber eyes fixed on his master with a devotion that tore at Aris's heart. Cal was slipping in and out of consciousness, his face a pale mask. The dog, he wheezed. Help Thor. That's an order. Aris looked from the man to the animal. Triage demanded she save the human first, but she saw the wild desperation in Cal's eyes. If she didn't tend to the dog, the man might give up the fight entirely. I'm on it, Aris said, kneeling beside Thor. Her scissors made quick work of the wet fur around the wound on his flank. It was a deep graze from a bullet, narrowly missing the femoral artery but tearing through muscle. Good boy, she murmured, injecting a local anesthetic and a mild sedative. Thor didn't growl this time. It was as if he understood. Within 10 minutes, Thor was stable, groggy but breathing easier. She scrubbed her hands, took a deep breath, and turned to the man on the table. He's stable, Aris announced, pulling on a fresh pair of latex gloves. Now it's your turn. She cut away his tactical vest and the soaked thermal shirt beneath. The fabric fell away to reveal a torso mapped with scars. Around his neck was a set of dog tags. Wilson, Daniel, U.S. Navy. The sight caught in her throat, a sharp, painful memory of her late husband, David. She pushed the memory away. The bullet is lodged deep in your deltoid, pressed against the bone, she said, her voice steady. I need to put you under. I have ketamine and propofol. No, Cal gritted out, his good hand gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles were white. Local only. Lidocaine. I need to be awake. That's insane, Aris countered. I have to dig that bullet out. The pain will be immense. If you move, I could sever an artery. If I'm under, Cal gasped, his eyes locking on hers with terrifying clarity, and they come back, we're all dead. I need to be able to pull a trigger. He nodded toward his pistol, which Aris had placed on the counter. His sheer force of will silenced her. Arguing would only waste time they didn't have. Fine, she said, grabbing a vial of lidocaine. But you had better not move. The next hour was an exercise in controlled brutality. As she began to probe the wound, Cal threw his head back, a strangled sound of agony escaping his clenched jaw. His entire body went rigid. Talk to me, she commanded, trying to anchor him. Tell me about the dog. Cal's breaths were shallow. Thor, he managed, the word a lifeline. Saved my life, Afghanistan, twice. Best partner a man could have. Aris found the bullet. It was jagged, lodged tight. Almost there, Cal. Stay with me. She applied pressure to extract it, and that's when his body gave out. The spike of pain sent his system into shock. The heart monitor she'd hooked him up to beeped erratically before flatlining into a single, high-pitched tone. No, no, no. Aris cried. The bloody bullet clattered into a metal tray. Cal's eyes rolled back. Cal. She started compressions, hard and fast. Come on, soldier, she grunted with effort. You are not dying in a vet clinic. Not today. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. She pinched his nose and breathed air into his lungs. Tears blurred her vision. Suddenly, there was a movement on the floor. Thor, fighting through the sedative, dragged himself across the tiles. He let out a single, sharp bark, an order to his fallen leader. He put his front paws on the table and licked Cal's lifeless hand, whining. As if hearing the call, Cal's body convulsed. He took a sharp, ragged breath. The monitor beeped once, twice, then settled into a weak but steady rhythm. Aris collapsed against the counter, sliding to the floor and burying her face in her hands. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Above her, Cal slowly turned his head, his eyes barely open, but seeing. His hand twitched, his fingers brushing the coarse fur of the German shepherd's muzzle. Thor laid his head on the table beside his master's shoulder and closed his eyes. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside, the silence was heavy with the weight of survival. Aris looked up, wiping blood and tears from her cheek. She had saved him. But as she looked at the bullet in the tray and the gun on the counter, she knew the fight was far from over. Dawn over Ohio came not with a burst of sun, but with a slow, reluctant brightening of the gray overcast sky. The rain had softened to a persistent drizzle, washing the blood from the alley but not the danger. Aris drove her old Ford Escape, knuckles white on the steering wheel, eyes darting to the rearview mirror. In the back, Cal lay under a wool blanket, drifting in and out of a medicated haze, while Thor, sedated but watchful, rested his heavy head on Cal's chest. They were leaving the city limits, heading south into the rolling hills and dense woodlands of rural Ohio, where Aris's grandfather had built a small farmhouse decades ago. It was a hideout, a sanctuary tucked at the end of a long gravel road that wound through thick forests of oak and maple, ending at the edge of a vast, silent cornfield. They arrived as the sun finally broke through the clouds. The farmhouse was made of weathered wood and stone, standing solid against a backdrop of towering trees. It took all of Aris's strength to help Cal from the car. He was conscious, but his movements were stiff, his face a mask of pained concentration. Thor, limping but determined, hopped out and immediately began a perimeter sweep, his nose twitching. Inside, Aris said, guiding Cal up the creaking porch steps. The house smelled of old wood and lemon polish, a scent that transported her to simpler times. She settled Cal on the oversized leather sofa in the living room. He sank into the cushions, his dark eyes scanning the room, noting exits, windows, the layout. It was a reflex he couldn't turn off. While Cal rested, Aris went to the kitchen. She found a carton of chicken broth, some carrots, and noodles. Soon, the aroma of chicken soup began to fill the small house, chasing away the scent of antiseptic and fear. She ladled a steaming bowl and brought it to the living room. Cal was awake, his hand resting absently on Thor's neck. The dog was on the rug, but as Aris approached, he didn't growl. Instead, the massive shepherd thumped his tail once against the floor and offered his neck for a scratch. Aris obliged, her fingers sinking into the thick fur behind his ears. Cal watched the interaction. "He doesn't do that," Cal murmured, his voice hoarse. "Thor. He's a working dog. He doesn't let civilians touch him." "Maybe he knows I'm not the enemy," Aris said softly, setting the soup on the coffee table. "Or maybe he just knows I saved his life. Animals have long memories." Cal looked at the soup, then at Aris. "Why?" he asked. "Why didn't you just leave us in the alley? Why bring us here?" Aris sat in the armchair opposite him. "Because I saw your dog tags," she answered simply. "And because 3 years ago, 2 officers in dress uniform knocked on my door to tell me my husband wasn't coming home. I couldn't save David, but I could save you." The mention of her husband hung in the air. Cal's expression tightened, a flicker of shared grief in his eyes. He tried to sit up straighter, wincing. "I was investigating a leak," he said, deciding she deserved the truth. "Julian Croft. He's a private defense contractor. On paper, he provides logistics for the Navy. In reality, he's selling prototype drone technology to insurgent groups in Eastern Europe. I found the ledger. I have the proof." Aris listened, horrified. Julian Croft was a name she'd seen in the news, a philanthropist, a pillar of the community. "The mole wasn't Croft," Cal continued, his voice low. "It was someone on my own team. He told Croft where I'd be. They ambushed us at the meet. Thor took down the first man, but there were too many. I was hit, managed to get us to the exfil point, but the chopper never came." He looked out the window, his jaw tight. "Croft has resources. He has mercenaries. By being here, I'm putting a target on your back." He pushed himself forward, swinging his legs off the sofa. "I have to go." "Cal, stop," Aris said, standing. "You can barely walk." "I can walk enough," Cal gritted out. He grabbed the edge of the coffee table, hauling himself to his feet. The movement was too sudden. The stitches in his shoulder pulled, and a fresh bloom of red appeared on the white bandage. His knees buckled, and he would have crashed to the floor if Aris hadn't lunged forward to catch him. "Let me go," he groaned, sweat beading on his forehead. "I won't have you die for me." "I'm not asking for your permission, Commander," Aris snapped, her voice shifting from gentle veterinarian to the tough army wife she had once been. She guided him back to the sofa, her eyes blazing. "You're bleeding. You're exhausted. And your dog can't run. If you walk out that door, you die. And if you die, Croft wins." Is that what you want? Cal looked up at her, stunned by the ferocity in her voice. He saw the same determination he'd seen in his SEAL brothers. He looked at Thor, watching them with wide, worried eyes, and then back at Aris. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a reluctant acceptance. He leaned back, closing his eyes. No, he whispered. That's not what I want. Good, Aris said, stepping back. Then eat your soup. We're safe here, for now. No one knows about this place but me. She walked to the window, looking out at the peaceful, empty fields, knowing that peace was an illusion, but one they desperately needed to hold on to. 3 quiet days passed at the farmhouse, a fragile piece of peace that felt more like holding your breath before a dive than actual safety. The storm had finally broken, leaving behind a crisp, clear sky and air so clean it stung the lungs. Inside, the only sounds were the crackle of oak logs in the stone fireplace and the rhythmic rasp of a brush against fur. Cal sat on the braided rug before the fire, his injured leg outstretched, his left arm immobilized in a sling Aris had fashioned. In his right hand, he held a stiff bristled brush, working it steadily down Thor's back. The German shepherd, normally a creature of high alert, was melted into a puddle of contentment, his eyes closed. Aris stood in the kitchen doorway, a mug of tea in her hands, watching them. It was a startling contrast. This was a man trained to eliminate enemies with lethal efficiency. Yet his touch with the animal was impossibly gentle. It hurt to watch, reminding her of David, before the darkness had fully claimed him, sitting on this very floor, playing with their old golden retriever. Cal looked up, sensing her presence. The wary look returned to his eyes. He's shedding, Cal said, his voice less strained than it had been. Probably stress, Aris suggested, entering the room and perching on the edge of the sofa. I don't think he's relaxed like this since you got here. Neither have you. Cal paused. Relaxing is dangerous. It makes you slow. We're not in Afghanistan, Cal, you're in a living room in Ohio. Aris set her tea down. Thor needs his antibiotic. Can you manage it today? I want to see how your mobility is improving. It was a test, and they both knew it. Cal nodded, shifting his position. He took the syringe Aris had prepared. His hand, usually rock steady on a rifle, trembled slightly. It wasn't weakness. It was the hesitation of a man terrified of hurting the one thing he truly loved. Here, Aris whispered, sliding off the sofa to kneel beside him. She didn't take the syringe. Instead, she placed her hand over his, her cool fingers on his warm, feverish skin. The contact was electric. Easy does it. It's subcutaneous. Just lift the skin right there. Cal followed her direction, his breathing syncing with hers. He pushed the plunger, and Thor didn't even flinch. Cal let out a long, shuddering breath. He didn't pull his hand away immediately, and neither did she. You have gentle hands for a soldier, Aris said softly, pulling back. Cal looked at his hand as if it belonged to a stranger. They haven't been gentle for a long time, he admitted, his gaze drifting to the fire. When you do what I do, you flip a switch. You become a machine. Target, identify, eliminate. But the thing is, nobody teaches you how to flip it off. You come home and the silence is louder than gunfire. You look at a person and you assess their threat level. He looked at Aris, his eyes dark with a torment deeper than any bullet wound. I don't know how to be normal, Aris. I don't think I have it in me anymore. A lump formed in Aris's throat. David used to say the same thing, she confessed. He was a pilot. Said the sky was the only place that made sense because down here, everything was too complicated. When he came back that last time, he was hollowed out. She reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing his good arm. But you're not a machine, Cal. Machines don't risk their lives for a dog. Machines don't grieve. The fact that you feel this disconnect, it means you're still human. You're just wounded, and I'm not talking about your shoulder. Cal stared at her, and for the first time, the steel in his eyes melted into something raw and vulnerable. I'm scared, he whispered. A confession that would get him court-martialed in his world. Not of dying. I'm scared of living like this, alone, waiting for the last bullet with my name on it. You're not alone, Aris said fiercely. Not now. And Thor is right here. The dog, sensing the shift in emotional barometric pressure, lifted his head and rested it heavily on Cal's knee. The moment was broken by the harsh reality of their situation. I need to check the perimeter, Cal said suddenly, the soldier reasserting control. He grabbed a pair of binoculars from his go bag and limped to the front door. Aris followed him onto the porch. The air was cold, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. The farmhouse sat on a rise, overlooking the gravel road that wound back to the main highway 3 miles away. Cal raised the binoculars, scanning the tree line, the edge of the cornfield, and finally, the distant junction. He stood there for a long time, statue still. Then his posture stiffened. "What is it?" Aris asked. "At the junction," Cal said, handing her the glasses. "Tell me what you see." Aris looked through the lenses. At the end of the road, parked on the shoulder of the county highway, was a dark gray sedan. It looked innocuous, but then she saw the man standing beside the open driver's door. He wasn't looking at a map or changing a tire. He was looking up the gravel road, looking directly toward their hiding place. He raised a hand to his ear. "It's a gray sedan," Aris said, her heart starting to pound. "Just a tourist?" "Tourists don't wear tactical boots with jeans," Cal answered flatly, taking the binoculars back. "And they don't stand at a dead-end turnoff for 20 minutes staring at nothing." He lowered the glasses, his face set in the hard, dangerous lines of the warrior she had met in the alley. "That's Croft's advance team. They're sweeping the area. They haven't found the house yet, but they know I'm in the vicinity." He turned to Aris, his eyes full of regret, but resolute. "The quiet time is over, Aris. We're not hiding anymore. We're being hunted." The farmhouse no longer felt like a sanctuary, it felt like a cage. Cal paced the small living room, his limp pronounced but ignored, his energy vibrating with the restless intensity of a trapped tiger. Without a secure line of communication, they were blind. "I need to contact Rourke," Cal said, pausing to stare out the window. "Master Chief Gunner Rourke. He's the only one at command who isn't in Croft's pocket. If anyone can put together an extraction team without tripping Croft's alarms, it's him." He turned to Aris, his expression grim. "But I can't go into town. My face is marked. If a traffic camera or a curious deputy spots me, it's over." Aris buttoned her raincoat, her hand steady despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. "I'll go," she said, grabbing her keys. "There's a Walmart in Lancaster, about 20 minutes from here. I can get a burner phone and a prepaid card with cash. I'll blend in." Cal hesitated, stepping closer. "Keep your head down," he instructed, his voice low. "Don't make eye contact. If you think you're being followed, don't come back here. Drive to the sheriff's department. Make a scene. Understand?" "I understand," Aris replied. She bent down to pet Thor. "Guard the fort, boy." The drive to town was a blur of rain-slicked roads and paranoia. In Lancaster, Aris parked in the crowded lot, pulling her hood up. Inside, she grabbed a cheap flip phone and a $50 prepaid card. At the checkout, the teenage clerk snapped his gum. "Nasty weather, huh?" "Yeah," Aris mumbled, turning her face away from the security camera. "Just a backup for hiking emergencies." She paid with crisp 20s and walked out, her heart hammering. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, a prickling sensation crawled up the back of her neck. She paused at a display of winter tires, pretending to adjust her boot, and glanced at her reflection in the store window. Behind her, about 30 yards away, a man in a tan canvas jacket stood near a vending machine. He was watching her. He was average in every way, exactly the kind of man Cal had warned her about. As she started walking, so did he. Panic flared, but Aris forced it down. She turned left, walking quickly toward the town square. She knew the public library had a rear exit that led to the alley behind the post office. Aris ducked inside the library's heavy doors. She walked purposefully through the stacks, hearing the doors open behind her. She didn't look back. She slipped through the children's section, pushed through an emergency exit, and sprinted around the block, circling back to her car from the opposite direction. Her tail was gone. She got in, locked the doors, and drove, making 3 random turns before heading back to the highway. When she got back to the farmhouse, Cal met her at the door, a knife in his good hand, Thor at his heel. He saw her pale face and the tremor in her hands as she gave him the plastic bag. "You run into trouble?" "I was followed," Aris admitted. "Tan jacket, average build. I lost him at the library." Cal's jaw tightened. "Good work. You're learning." He tore open the package, assembled the phone, and dialed a number from memory. He put the phone on speaker. The line rang 4 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Yeah. This is Nomad," Cal said, using his call sign. There was a pause. "Nomad." The voice crackled. It was Master Chief Gunner Gunny Rourke. "Christ, kid, we thought you were Kia. Official report says you went rogue." "The report's a lie written by Croft," Cal said quickly. "I have the ledger, Gunny." I have the proof. But my team, they're gone. It was a setup. Rourke let out a string of colorful curses. Where are you? Secure location. Civilian involved. I need extraction, Gunny. And I need it quiet. If Croft knows I'm alive, he'll level this place. Listen to me, Cal. Rourke's voice dropped. Croft has eyes and ears all over this command. If I send a bird now, he'll know before the pilot even spools up the engines. It'll take time to set up a sterile corridor. How much time? Cal asked, looking at Aris. 24 hours, Rourke said. Sit tight. Stay dark. I'll have a team on you at 0800 tomorrow. Do not engage. Do not move unless you have to. The line went dead. 24 hours, Cal repeated. That's a lifetime. Aris went to the window. We can do 24 hours, she said, trying to convince herself. We have food, we have weapons, we have the terrain advantage. Cal didn't answer. He was watching Thor. The dog was standing in the middle of the room, body rigid, ears swiveling toward the front window. The fur along his spine began to rise. A low, menacing growl started deep in his throat, a vibration that seemed to shake the floorboards. Cal grabbed his pistol from the table. He moved to the window, peering through a crack in the curtains. Get down, he whispered to Aris, his voice devoid of fear, replaced by cold, tactical calculation. Rourke said 24 hours. Croft isn't waiting. Outside, at the edge of the tree line, a shadow moved. They had been found. Night fell on the Ohio hills like a heavy shroud. Inside the farmhouse, the air was thick with a tension that vibrated in the air. Cal moved through the rooms with a calculated efficiency, killing the lights until the house was bathed only in the faint, silvery moonlight filtering through the curtains. He knew Croft's men were out there, watching, probing, waiting for fatigue to set in. But Cal didn't plan on sleeping. He shoved the heavy oak dining table against the front door and barricaded the back entrance with a stack of firewood. Aris watched him, her childhood sanctuary being turned into a fortress. Aris, come here, Cal said, his voice low and even. He was standing by the fireplace, holding a sleek, black Sig Sauer P226 pistol he'd pulled from his tactical bag. I need you to know how to use this. If they breach, I might have more than one target. You need to be the last line of defense. Aris hesitated, then reached out. The metal was cold against her skin, its weight surprising. Cal stood behind her, his chest brushing her back, his good hand coming up to guide hers. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to destroy the target, he instructed, his breath warm near her ear. The intimacy of the moment was a stark contrast to the violence the weapon represented. Grip it firm. Support with your left hand. He guided her, his calloused palm against her skin. Aim for center mass, Cal continued. You don't have to be a marksman. You just have to stop them from getting to you. Can you do that? Aris took a deep breath, picturing the face of the man who had followed her in town. The steel in her spine, forged in the fire of her husband's loss, hardened. Yes, she whispered, her hand tightening on the gun. I can. They sat in the living room as the hours ticked by. Thor lay between them on the rug, his ears swiveling like radar dishes. The pain in Cal's shoulder was returning, but he refused the painkillers that would dull his senses. To distract him, and perhaps herself, Aris spoke into the darkness. What's the first thing you'll do? She asked softly. When this is over. When you're free. Cal looked at her, the firelight catching the weary depths in his eyes. There's a place in Hocking Hills, he said, his voice taking on a dreamy quality she'd never heard before. Old Man's Cave. At sunrise, the light hits the waterfalls and turns the whole world gold. It's quiet there. Real quiet. He shifted, his hand brushing hers on the sofa cushion. I'd like to take you there, Aris. Not as a soldier running from a fight. Not as a patient bleeding out on your table. Just a man. A normal man who wants to watch the sunrise with you. The promise hung in the air, fragile and beautiful. Aris turned her hand over, lacing her fingers with his. I'd like that, she whispered. I'd like that very much. The breach came at 0200. It began not with a bang, but with a sudden, suffocating absence. The hum of the refrigerator died. The porch light winked out. The house plunged into absolute blackness. Power's cut, Cal hissed, already moving. Get behind the sofa. Now. Aris scrambled to the floor, clutching the pistol. Thor was instantly on his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Then came the sharp, violent sound of shattering glass from the kitchen. The back door was kicked in with a thunderous crack that shook the floorboards. Stay put, Cal ordered, melting into the shadows. 3 figures emerged from the hallway, silhouettes against the faint moonlight. Professionals. The lead merc, a tall figure with night vision goggles, swept his rifle across the room, spotting Aris's movement behind the sofa. He raised his weapon. No. Aris screamed, bringing her own gun up, but she was too slow. Before the merc could fire, a blur of fur and teeth launched from the shadows. Thor. Despite the stiffness in his healing leg, the shepherd hit the mercenary with the force of a missile. His jaws clamped onto the man's forearm, the force of the bite crushing through Kevlar and flesh. The merc screamed, his rifle discharging wildly into the ceiling as he struggled to shake the 80-pound animal. Thor held on, snarling. The distraction was all Cal needed. He emerged from the darkness, firing 2 controlled shots. The second mercenary dropped. The third turned, engaging Cal. The room erupted in chaos, muzzle flashes strobing through the farmhouse like a hellish disco light. Thor was thrown against a wall by the first mercenary, but scrambled back up, limping, and planted himself firmly between the attacker and Aris. In the deafening noise of the gunfight, the promise of a sunrise seemed a million miles away, replaced by the desperate, bloody struggle to survive the night. The farmhouse was a death trap. Out the back, Cal roared, laying down a burst of suppressing fire toward the hallway. Aris didn't hesitate. She grabbed the collar of Thor's tactical vest, pulling the dog toward the kitchen door, which now hung from a single hinge. They burst out into the cold night air, rain soaking them instantly. The woods loomed ahead, a wall of dark trees. To anyone else, the forest would be a nightmare, but to Cal, it was a playground. He wasn't retreating, he was changing the environment. They scrambled toward the tree line, the ground slick with mud and wet leaves. Up the ridge, Cal ordered, pointing toward a rocky outcrop 50 yards away. Stay low. Don't stop. He didn't follow her immediately. Instead, he crouched behind a woodpile, waiting. As the first mercenary charged through the back door, Cal fired twice. The man went down. Cal turned and vanished into the trees. Aris reached the shelter of a large, fallen log, pulling Thor down beside her. Below them, flashlight beams cut through the darkness. The hunters were in the woods. Cal materialized beside her moments later, a finger to his lips. He gestured to the left flank. 2 tangos, advancing left. Ambush. He looked at Aris, then pointed to a thicket 20 feet away. He wanted her to draw their fire. It was a dangerous request, but Aris nodded. She was no longer a victim. She picked up a heavy rock, her hand trembling not with fear, but with adrenaline. She waited until the flashlight beam swept past Cal's position. Then she threw the rock with all her might into the brush on the far right. The crack of breaking branches was loud in the storm-tossed quiet. Contact, right. One of the mercs yelled. The flashlight beam swiveled toward the sound, and the men opened fire on the empty bushes. It was the opening Cal needed. He rose from the ferns like a vengeful spirit, dropping the nearest attacker with a single shot. But there was a third man, one they hadn't seen, moving silently up the left to flank Cal. Thor saw him first. The shepherd didn't bark. He charged. Despite the stitches in his side, Thor hit the man in the chest with the force of a sledgehammer. The mercenary, startled, swung his rifle like a club, the heavy polymer stock connecting with Thor's injured ribs with a sickening thud. Thor let out a high-pitched yelp that tore through Aris's heart and collapsed in the mud, but he bought Cal the split second he needed. Cal spun and fired. The mercenary fell. Silence reclaimed the woods. Cal scrambled to Thor's side, quickly checking the dog. Thor was panting and whining, but he licked Cal's hand, trying to get up. Good boy, Cal whispered, his voice choked. Stay. He reloaded his weapon, scanning the darkness. Is that all of them? Aris asked, her voice shaking. Before Cal could answer, a blinding spotlight bleached the color from the world, originating from the direction of the house. A slow, mocking clap echoed through the trees. Stepping into the light was a man who looked utterly out of place. Marcus Croft, in his late 50s, wore a pristine charcoal wool coat and a cashmere scarf. He had perfectly coiffed silver hair and the cold, dead eyes of a shark. He was not alone. 2 heavily armed bodyguards flanked him, and one of them had a laser sight aimed squarely at Aris's chest. Impressive, Commander, Croft called out, his voice smooth. You took out my acquisition team with 1 arm, and a veterinarian. He stepped closer, safely behind his men. But the game is over. Drop the weapon, Cal, or the good doctor becomes collateral damage. Cal was frozen. He had a shot at Croft, but he couldn't take out the bodyguard aiming at Aris fast enough. The red dot danced over her heart. Slowly, deliberately, Cal placed his Sig Sauer on the wet ground and kicked it away. He raised his hands. Smart choice, Croft sneered. He motioned to his bodyguard. Get the girl. Dispose of the dog and bring the commander to me. The bodyguard moved toward Aris. Thor growled, a low, defiant sound, trying to pull his broken body between Aris and the threat. No. Aris yelled, shielding the dog with her own body. Croft raised his own pistol, aiming it at Cal's head. Goodbye, Cal. You were a bad investment. Thump 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 thump. The sound started as a vibration in the ground, then grew to a roar that drowned out the wind. The treetops were suddenly whipped into a frenzy as a downdraft slammed into the clearing. A brilliant searchlight stabbed down from the heavens, pinning Croft and his men like insects under a magnifying glass. A voice, amplified by a loudspeaker, boomed from the sky. This is the United States Navy. Drop your weapons or you will be engaged. An MH-60 Black Hawk helicopter hovered just above the tree line, its side doors open. Ropes deployed and figures in full combat gear slid down with terrifying speed. Croft looked up, his face a mask of disbelief. He swung his gun toward Cal in a final act of spite, but a single shot rang out from the darkness of the woods. Croft's gun flew from his hand as he cried out, clutching his wrist. Master Chief Gunner Rourke stepped out from behind an oak tree, his rifle smoking, his face a granite mask. I told you to wait 24 hours, kid. Rourke yelled over the rotor wash, signaling his team to move in. But I figured you wouldn't listen, so I came early. The SEAL team swarmed the clearing. Croft and his bodyguards were tackled, zip-tied, and neutralized within seconds. A medic rushed toward Cal and Thor. Aris sat in the mud, her arms wrapped around the trembling German shepherd, tears streaming down her face as the adrenaline drained away. Cal pushed the medic aside and limped toward her. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the chaos around them, and pulled both Aris and Thor into a fierce embrace. I've got you, he whispered into her hair, his voice breaking. I've got you. The January sky over the Ohio Valley was a brilliant, cloudless blue, a stark contrast to the relentless gray rain that had defined the start of their story. The air was crisp, smelling of frost and wood smoke as Aris Thorne wiped down the stainless steel counter of Oak Creek Veterinary Care. It had been 2 months since the nightmare in the woods, 2 months since the helicopters and the gunfire. The physical scars on the clinic door had been repaired and repainted a welcoming shade of green, but the memories remained, not as ghosts, but as reminders of resilience. The bell over the door chimed, a cheerful sound that no longer made Aris jump. She looked up, and the smile that spread across her face was genuine, reaching all the way to her brown eyes, which had finally lost the shadow of old grief. Standing in the doorway was Cal Callahan. He was almost unrecognizable from the man she'd pulled from the alley. Gone was the black tactical gear, the desperate stubble, and the haunted, hollowed-out look of a man waiting to die. He wore dark denim jeans and a thick red and black flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing healed scars. He looked younger, lighter, as if a massive weight had been permanently lifted from his shoulders. At his side, on a simple leather leash, was Thor. The German shepherd stood tall, his coat glossy and well-brushed. He still favored his left side slightly, a subtle limp that would probably be with him forever, a badge of honor. When Thor saw Aris, he didn't just wag his tail. His entire back half wiggled with unrestrained joy, and he let out a soft woo-woo sound he reserved only for her. Dr. Thorne, Cal said, his voice warm and rich, lacking its former pained rasp. I believe this patient is overdue for a belly rub. I think you might be right, Aris laughed, coming around the counter to kneel beside the dog. Thor buried his head in her shoulder, and she breathed in the scent of pine and clean fur. Ready to go home? She asked, looking up at Cal. Truck's all warmed up, he answered, offering a hand to help her up. His grip was firm, his palm calloused, but his touch was impossibly gentle. They walked out to his newly acquired pickup truck, a sensible, solid vehicle that replaced the anonymity of the sedans he used to drive. As they drove out of the city, heading east toward the hills, the radio played a soft classic rock song, filling the silence once occupied by tension. Hear anything from Rourke? Aris asked as the city landscape gave way to towering oaks. Cal nodded, his eyes on the road, but his posture relaxed. Texted me this morning. The grand jury indicted Julian Croft on 30 counts of treason, arms trafficking, and conspiracy. He's not getting out, Aris. He'll die in a supermax federal prison. Cal said it without malice, just a simple statement of fact. The war was over. And the Navy? She asked softly. Cal tapped the steering wheel. Honorable discharge came through yesterday. They offered me a promotion, a desk job at the Pentagon, and another medal. And I told them I had a prior engagement. Cal glanced at her, a wry grin touching his lips. I told them I was done fighting for a country that didn't need me as much as I needed to find myself. I was a soldier for 18 years, Aris. That mission is complete. They pulled up the gravel drive to the farmhouse. It looked different now. The overgrown brush had been cleared. The windows were clean, and a fresh stack of firewood was piled near the porch. It was no longer a hideout. It was a project. It was a home in the making. Cal parked and let Thor out, who immediately trotted off to patrol his territory, not for enemies, but for squirrels. I started on the railing this morning, Cal said, gesturing to the porch where the smell of fresh sawdust hung in the cool air. The old wood was rotten. Can't build a future on a rotten foundation. He stepped onto the porch, testing the new beam with his weight. It held firm. Aris watched him, admiring the purposeful way he moved, now absent of its deadly tension. He was channeling his energy into building instead of breaking. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in the promised shades of pink and gold, casting long shadows across the fields. It was the golden hour, the time of day that makes everything look soft and warm. Cal let out a sharp, clear whistle, and Thor came trotting back, panting happily. Cal sat on the top step of the porch, patting the space beside him. Aris sat down, their shoulders touching, the warmth between them radiating through their coats. Thor sat before them, looking intently from one to the other, his ears perked. Cal reached into his pocket. For a second, Aris's heart fluttered. A ring? But Cal pulled out a leather collar. It was beautifully handmade, sturdy and elegant. Attached to it was a silver tag that caught the last rays of the sun. Come here, buddy, Cal said softly. He unclipped Thor's old, frayed nylon collar, the tactical one he had worn in combat, and set it aside. It was a symbolic shedding of the past. He threaded the new collar around the dog's neck, buckling it. Thor puffed out his chest, looking proud. Cal turned the tag so Aris could read it. It didn't just say Thor. Etched into the metal were 3 names, linked together. Cal, Aris, Thor. And beneath them, a simple phone number, the landline for the farmhouse. Cal didn't get up. He shifted from the step to one knee beside it, but he kept his focus on the dog, his hand on Thor's neck as he looked up at Aris. I don't know how to ask you to stay, Cal admitted, his voice thick with emotion. I'm not good with words. I'm good at logistics. And logistically, this team doesn't work without you. He took a breath, the vulnerability in his eyes shining brighter than any metal. You saved his life, Aris. You saved my life. You pulled us out of the rain and gave us a place to land. I don't want to run anymore. I don't want to go to the mountains alone. I want this, us, here. He stroked Thor's fur. This tag, it means he belongs to this pack. To our pack, if you'll have us. Aris looked at the names on the tag, then at the man who had put down his weapons to pick up a hammer and build a home. Tears welled in her eyes, not of grief, but of overwhelming peace. She reached out, cupping Cal's face, her thumb tracing the faint line of a healed scar on his jaw. You're not going anywhere, Cal Callahan, she whispered. You're already home. Cal leaned into her touch, closing his eyes for a moment before turning to kiss her palm. Then he stood, pulling her into his arms, and they settled into the porch swing that Cal had fixed the week before. Thor, sensing the absolute safety of the moment, lay down across their feet, letting out a long, contented sigh as his eyes slowly drifted shut. Together, the 3 of them watched the sun disappear behind the silhouette of the Appalachian foothills. The quiet fields reflected the first stars of the evening. There were no sirens, no gunshots, no black SUVs waiting in the shadows. Just the sound of the wind sighing through the pines, the rhythmic creak of the swing, and the steady, synchronized beat of 3 hearts that had survived the storm to find their way to the quiet, enduring warmth of the light.